as you set more boundaries as the expression of clarity that you embody, what you'll notice is some pushback in your life, some pushback in your relationships. And this pushback I often refer to as a tantrum. It's the immature aspects of yourself that you have outgrown. As you mature, you will start setting boundaries. And the immature patterns will be reflected in your relationships. As you set boundaries with your husband or your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your colleagues or friends, you're bound to experience what I call tantrums. It's no different than when you set boundaries with kids. If you're a parent, mother or father, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you set these boundaries, you often remove access to something. It's like a gate, a door, a wall. And those who had access before won't like that boundary. And one of the ways of expressing that is throwing a tantrum. It often looks like verbal and emotional reactivity, an outburst verbally, an emotional outburst, stomping their feet, throwing something, destroying something, getting angry. Could like withholding something, affection or connection. Could look like resentment or bitterness, becoming a stone wall, cold, making you feel guilty, almost punishing you for setting that boundary. These are all different ways. I often just group them all as the immaturity of throwing a tantrum. Hello.
Hi.
And this tantrum is very immature. You see it with kids, but it's not reserved. Hello. It's not reserved to children only. It's actually very common for adults. Requires you to be aware of the patterns within yourself. These immaturity or these immature patterns are only visible by maturity. Immaturity can't see immaturity. It's only maturity that can see immaturity. So as you continue to grow, you start recognizing these immature patterns within yourself. And as you do, you start seeing them outside of yourself, sort of say. Meaning they're reflected in your relationships. You see them in your friends, your family, your colleagues, your partner. So as you set these boundaries, These patterns often are experienced. You set the boundary, your wife, your husband, your kids, your friends throw a tantrum. Something that was imbalanced is being brought to light. And your boundary is actually part of restoring balance. And you are no longer tolerating that in your relationship because you no longer tolerate it within yourself. It's something that you've simply outgrown. This tantrum is a way of testing that boundary. It wants to see if that boundary is real. And this is where you must stay firm in your boundary. Don't soften your boundary. This is where your boundary structure is being tested. Don't collapse. Don't weaken your boundary. When the other tries to guilt trip you, when the other gives you the silent shoulder, when the other throws their tantrum, kicking and screaming, crying. That tantrum is a learned tactic. It's a control tactic. It's something that is conditioned, is learned. And you see this with kids. Let me give you a concrete example. I have a boundary on our TV. When the kids are watching TV, the volume can't go any higher than 25. The little levels on the volume doesn't go any higher than 25. Now that boundary is not about me not allowing the kids to have fun. It's a boundary that respects the TV. It's a boundary that protects the TV. If there's no boundary on the volume, then the kids will crank the volume, blow the speaker, which they've done in the past. So it's not about me setting a boundary to limit their fun. It's actually a boundary that supports their fun. It enables it, because when the speaker is blown and there's no more sound on the TV, then they can't enjoy the TV. So it actually protects the fun. But seen through the eyes of the immature, boundaries always seem like it limits one's fun, one's enjoyment. But seen through the eyes of the mature, you see how these boundaries are very practical, and they often come from a place of respect and honor. and protection for the very things that we enjoy. So anyways, back to the boundary of the volume. Set the boundary on the volume no higher than 25. And if the volume gets higher than 25, then I just turn off the TV, take the remote. You lost the TV. No more TV. And that's the boundary, followed by the consequence for when the boundary is not respected. The consequence when the boundary is broken is then enforced. Now, the kids aren't going to like that. They're not going to like that consequence. And if they throw the tantrum, kicking and screaming, throwing something, often their toy, destroying something, sometimes the leaves of plants in our home, whatever it may be that comes from that breach of boundary, that tantrum is trying to regain control, regain access. It doesn't like when the access is denied. The TV is no longer accessible. That boundary, it's like a locked door. The consequence is removing access. Now they're locked out, and the kicking and the screaming starts, the tantrum. Now, if your tantrum weakens that boundary, if somehow that tantrum becomes a key to gaining access, then it's learned that throwing a tantrum can regain access. Throwing a tantrum can regain control. And this is something that's learned early on in life. So this is really testing to see how strong your boundary is, how steady your boundary is. It's about consistency. When you stand grounded in your decision, standing grounded with a spine as the structure, that you are embodying that boundary consistently, and you don't collapse, you don't cave, you don't crumble under the pressure of a tantrum, then eventually that resistance turns into respect. At first they resist the boundary, and then they respect the boundary. They learn that your boundary is non-negotiable. They learn that your boundary is immovable. And this doesn't happen overnight, but it's through the consistency of your boundary that you're sort of re-teaching, re-educating, reconditioning them to learn, to understand, to realize that throwing a tantrum doesn't work. And when that's something that's been conditioned, that people believe and also experience in their life, that throwing a tantrum is a way that I can regain control, I can get my way, I can get access, then all of a sudden they realize that that's actually not the case, and they're not able to gain access or gain control or get their way, no matter how big the tantrum is, that reconditioning is part of the process of transforming these relationships when you set those boundaries. Because when you set those boundaries, you start transforming your relationship with your husband or your wife, your kids, your colleagues, your friends, your extended family. You start transforming those relationships. And it's a way that you're sort of parenting these immature patterns within yourself so that you're not tolerating it anymore. These boundaries become a way of transforming these patterns in a strong, loving way. These boundaries are actually made of love. Through the eyes of the immature, they may look sharp, feel cold, feel rigid. But when you come from love, and it's expressed in the form of respect and honor and protection, you see, this is the masculine expression of that love in the form of boundaries. And like I said, it will be resisted at first, but then it will be respected. And ultimately, those who resist your boundaries at first actually long to feel those boundaries as an immovable, stable structure. That protects, that honors, and respects. The essence of what they truly are. So if you're ready to transform your relationships by embodying the essence of who you truly are and expressing that in the form of boundaries, then I invite you to join me in truth.